So without further ado, let me introduce my good friend and colleague, Rob Califf, who's online. Rob, how are you doing?
Victor, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, well, I haven't introduced you yet. I was just admiring your bow tie.
Trying to pat myself up here. Despite all my vaccinations, I've got a URI. I was really looking forward to spending some time with many old friends at this meeting, but probably best not to infect a bunch of people.
Yeah. Well, we're thankful for that. So, Rob does not need any introduction. How many people don't know Rob Califf? Rob, there's no hand going up to say they don't know you, so I don't need to introduce you anymore. Except to say I have worked with Rob for many years. Early days in admiration as a cardiologist, and then he as a world-class clinical researchers, the mega trials, you name it. Then I had the fortune working with Rob for 10 years at Duke. And believe me, he kept me honest. He'll tell you stories about this. And of course, then he went to Verily. He had one stint as FDA commissioner. I guess he didn't, we had to get him back to do another one, Rob. I'm not sure what that really means, but I think we are certainly better off having you as FDA commissioner. So Rob, let me just turn to you and give your inspirational talk.
Thanks, Victor.
Thank you.
It is really good to be part of this meeting, and I'm very much looking forward to what is said at the rest of the meeting, because I think, as always, there's a lot at stake in trying to make the evidence generation system, the clinical research system, better than it has been. So my assignment, I think, was to really just sort of kick it off with a look back, a look at where we are now, and some thoughts about the future. So I'll try to do my best at that. First, if we look back at 2015, that was an interesting time for me because I was just finishing up my primary academic career and heading to the FDA. I feel like at that time things were really moving in this arena. Many of you were instigators, if you will, in the view that if we did experiments on human beings, aka clinical trials, that the very process of consent to create generalizable knowledge meant that the findings at least should be available. And of course, we took it further by making the argument that the individual patient data should also be available. But although things were moving, there was a lot that just wasn't done yet. And there were many obstacles that needed to be overcome. And I give many of the people in this room and Vivly and others who worked on this a lot of credit for overcoming a number of those obstacles. I'm particularly feel good about the fact that clinicaltrials.gov, which had pretty bad compliance rates going back, is now getting better and better. But I'll talk a little bit about some issues that still exist there. So at least, back in 2015, most often we were failing at first base. We didn't even have the results posted. There was still an issue of non-publication of negative results, and many studies which never saw the light of day. And so over the course of the last decade, I think that has really turned around. The law says you got to post your results and post your trial, at least for qualified trials, which is an issue that I hope you all will talk about a bit, because it turns out that if you look at the total universe of what's in clinicaltrials.gov versus what falls under a trial where the law requires posting of results, it's a fraction. But thank goodness now, as I'll talk about, the NIH has really picked up the game. So I think we can just mark a lot of progress there. That has led, I think, to some real advances in the way we do clinical trials. Once sunlight is cast on the data from trials and the results of trials, the arguments about publishing are markedly diminished compared to where they were. I'm no longer in academia, but I'm hearing that's no longer the primary issue in interactions with industry about getting the contracts done in clinical trials. It sure was a big issue for me when it wasn't required that results get posted. I'd also argue that the quality of the data is improving. There's nothing like having other people look at your data to improve the quality. We've known that at the FDA for a long time. Our requirement and ability to take an independent look at the raw data means that the medical products industry, by and large, produces high-quality data sets that are pretty easy to follow. But looking back at 2015, it was still the case, at least in my view, and of course, I may not have this all right. It was almost 10 years ago, but government-funded research still felt like it was still mostly in the purview of the rugged investigator, except in the case of cooperative groups or their equivalent. And there were a number of those, and they were continuing to grow. But where you had a multi-site organization, then many of the issues that at least set the case for making the results available and the possibility of individual patient data available, because the quality of the data is better. The situation was ripe for that to move forward. I'd also say, going back then, institutions took very little accountability for what the investigators were doing. And there are many reasons for that, but that's something that I believe that was beginning to change in 2015, has changed a lot. And I think with the new NIH policies, I'm expecting that to change a whole lot. It was noticeable in 2015 as clinicaltrials.gov got filled in more, at least with notification that studies are being done, that the so-called small crappy trials problem was very notable. There were just a lot of clinical trials that, at least at first look, didn't seem to have an adequate sample size or adequate methods to answer a question that would be considered important. And I know the NIH in particular has worked on that, but it's still work to be done. So when I look back at 2015, it was really, I think, a critical time. Change was underway. Progress had been made, but there was a lot to do. So now if we fast forward to today, I'm going to raise some real points of triumph and then some real concerns that I have that are currently in play. And I really do look forward to the discussion in this regard. I'd say that what we call traditional clinical trials are getting better and better in terms of the quality of the data for all the reasons that I gave, and the transparency. In other words, they're getting more and more refined. But I'm worried because traditional clinical trials are a smaller and smaller part of the information decision-making ecosystem that we live in. People are depending on many other methods and kinds of data and sources to make decisions that very much influence what treatments people get and how health systems are configured, and even who gets into a health system or an insurance plan. I believe that the Sunshine has done a really good job of cleaning up some bad things about industry trials I think in the last decade there's been great progress there. But I'd point out, and this will be key to where I think we got to pay attention in the future. I'll point out that if you roughly divide the clinical trials world into pre-market studies for approval of medical products and then everything else, those two worlds look very different. Pre-market approval trials tend to be rigorous. They tend to be very high quality in terms of data. And the reason, of course, is that for a company to get a product approved and on the market, they've got to have a clinical trial with those characteristics. But there are two things that have been bothersome to me for a long time, and one of them is particularly increasingly bothersome right now. First, if you look at the failure rate of people trying to get drugs on the market, 90% don't make it out of all those that are put into early phase clinical trials. We just looked at some preliminary data at the FDA, and despite all the lectures that I go to where people claim to have figured out how to pick out targets better and how much better their success rates are, there must be some other people not so successful, because the overall picture seems to be more INDs being filed and less success, and basically a flat rate of successful NDAs. Now, that's just a preliminary look, but if people thought that we still don't have a 90% failure rate, maybe it's a bit better when we really parse out the data. But there's not been a revolutionary change in that regard. And as you know, these early stage clinical trials don't fall under the same requirements. And so there's a lot of information loss there. I think in drug development, you typically learn a lot more from the failures than you do from the successes. So that's an issue for discussion. But the one I'm really most concerned about now is it's increasingly clear that that pre-market clinical trials world is driven by the need that companies have to get their products on the market. I guess that's obvious. But then after products are on the market, it is not a system. I'm not sure what it is, but we have a space where there's a tremendous amount of need for information, and there's not a systematic way of generating that information, and not great discipline about how it's done. And for those who think we can just rely on the medical products industry there, of course, anyone that's worked in the industry knows that the metric for industry doing a clinical trial is a net present value calculation. So while the trials may be high quality from the data perspective, from the perspective of the questions that need to be answered, I think there's a lot left on the table. I'll come back to that when we talk about the future. When it comes to the academic trials and NIH, we still got the small, crappy trials question. I think that has gotten better. I think the NIH has worked hard on it. I wish I could be there for Monica's talk. We've gotten to be pretty close over the last year since she's been at the NCI. And I think there's a lot that the FDA and NIH can do together. And I'd welcome you to make suggestions about when we look at the interagency possibilities for things that you think could be done across the agencies that would push this world into a better place. But in addition to the small, crappy trials issue, I think there's an increasing concerning issue of incursion of observational comparisons using real-world data done outside of the sunlight that we push so hard for in the structured, regulated, traditional clinical trials world. And more of this is being done by data aggregators who are not at all susceptible to the sunshine and who are informing health systems and others about the best course of actions in ways that affect patient care and decisions just as much as traditional clinical trials do. And right now we have no solution for that problem. And we're sort of at square one in that regard. They're not registered anywhere, so we're sort of where we were before clinicaltrials.gov. Now, if you don't think there are real problems happening right now in the area of data sharing in general, I want to raise three things that have recently happened that I look forward to through the course of the meeting hearing how the experts feel that we should deal with this. The first is something I'm dealing with today, which is the vaccine adverse event reporting system, which is not a clinical trial, but it is an example where federally paid for data is, you can download it right from the internet. And what we're seeing is the anti-vax crowd downloading the data, taking snippets of it, and magnifying those snippets in ways that give a very misleading picture of what you can really take away from that data set, which is really just a system to signal that there may be something to look at. Not there are many other layers of the vaccine adverse event system that, for example, create control groups and comparisons to really try to draw a causal inference. The second, very alarming to me, is an article by Peter Hotez yesterday, where, and I have no way of knowing how accurate Peter's view on this is, but the claim in the article is that the Russian government is taking negative information on the internet and using generative AI to produce large numbers of blogs and other material that all look different because generative AI can do that, and flooding the internet with this negative material. So when you combine issue 1 and 2, you begin to see how governance of this system is going to turn out to be really important. And I think Victor was completely right. I don't think any of us expected we would be in this environment in 2023, but we are. Then the last one, and this is one that is in play. It's very troubling, but I would guess that all of our institutions, for those of us that are in healthcare institutions of any kind, are doing the same kind of thing in one way or another. This is the articles that Stat put out about United Health in the last couple of days, where algorithms are being used to guide how long people stay in particular facilities, which would be a good use of data. But again, it's an example where it's not a randomized trial. It hasn't been done in the sunlight. The only reason these articles came out is that there were sort of whistleblowers in the organization. And again, I don't know how accurate the Stat articles are, but I certainly have seen many examples where the most common use of patient data in health systems is to figure out who you want to have in your system and who you'd rather move on somewhere else, being tailored to profitability. So if we look at the future, of course, given what I've just said, I want to emphasize again, a lot of progress in the traditional clinical trials world. I think we're on a good course. What NIH is doing is fantastic. But if we only look at what's under the lamppost, I'm very worried. So let's look at the future. I'm worried that we're going to have fewer and fewer good trials, but they'll have all the bells and whistles that we're talking about, because it seems that every time someone has a good idea, they assume we can just add on to the budget. And I think if Monica has Q&A time, when you ask her about the NIH budget, you'll hear some things that are pretty disturbing. So we've really got to come to grips with this pre-market, post-market difference, where in the pre-market, the medical products industry has been able to absorb additional costs because they got to get their products on the market and they make money when they do that. But in the post-market, those things don't hold, and they don't hold for health services interventions and other kinds of trials. Second thing I'd say is we've got to reward clinicians for participating. So if you ask me what I'm most worried about, it's not what we're talking about today. It's a decline in the interest of clinicians in participating in trials because of the pressure they're under. So I think our deficits in knowledge about how to use medical products or other interventions far exceed what's to be gained from sharing data. Now, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't share data and that the work that you all are doing is a waste of time. It should continue. But as we go about that work, I think we've all got to be thinking about what are we doing to make trials better and more appealing to the clinicians and the patients who should participate in them. And in that vein, I don't have answers, but I would say we got to deal with permissions. I think Monica may say something about that today, about what she's hoping to do. And the issue of de-identification, as we get into the deeper and deeper into the world of AI and machine learning, de-identification, I don't know. It's going to have some difficulties. It already has, but one has to wonder what the right policies will be as we move into this world. Just a couple more things. I want to say I think the new NIH policies are going to work, and I come with evidence. The NIH policies for diversity in clinical trials have worked really well. I wish NIH would talk more about it, but if you look at the last 3 or 4 years since the policies of restricting funding, if you don't follow through on your diversity plan came into being, we're really seeing a general matching of trials with the population at risk. Now, that's not true in every field, in every trial, but the progress is pretty amazing, and I think the same thing can happen with the new NIH policies. Then finally, I would say that AI and ML can take us in either direction. Positively, it's going to make it so much easier to clean up data, to share across lines of disparate standards and terminologies. Very excited about those possibilities. Simulations will become routine. It's not that simulations were never done before, but it's going to be much easier to do high-quality simulations using larger, more profound data sets. But it's also possible we'll be in the Wild West of healthcare driven by marketing and algorithms, as I've already pointed out. And the one thing about the use of algorithms is that to the extent they're used to align the activities that affect patient care with profit, we've seen that a lot is going to be left in the dust. And then finally, I'd urge you to read the article that came out today from Joe Ross, Joanne Wallstreicher, and Harlan Krumholtz in New England Journal. I don't know who arranged the timing, but it's pretty good. It, in a very nice way, summarizes where things are headed in a way that I have no major disagreement with.